to have Ashlea Simon with me, who is a co-leader of Britain First. We've went and filmed the demonstration in Birmingham the other week, and I watched Ashlea speak for the first time, and she was absolutely on fire, touching on many of the important issues we've spoke about on this channel. We've interviewed several grooming gang survivors. We were absolutely horrified when Labour government voted against investigating them. We've talked on this channel about the amount of excess immigration coming in and disrupting society here. And we've also talked about Keir Starmer getting these weird male models attacking his properties. So we're going to be getting into many of the ways that Starmer is destroying the UK. But before we do so, all of Ashlea's links are in the description box. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can follow her on X, where she was banned, but they returned her. Britain First has got its own YouTube channel. It's got its own X, and also you can see the stuff we've already done with Paul Golding. So thanks for coming on, Ashlea.
Not a problem. Thank you for having me, and thank you for coming to our Birmingham event. It's really important that YouTubers come to our events, film our events, because as you know, we was banned from social media for so long that a lot of people simply didn't know that we still existed. They didn't know that we were still active. So the more YouTubers that come to our events, film them, put them on their channels, the better it is for nationalism, because all we're doing, we're not fighting to make our names popular. We're not fighting for any of that. We're fighting to preserve a future for British children. So the more we all come together in that, whether we don't have to agree on everything, but if we agree on the bare basics, come together and support one another, and only in that, by working together, can we save this country and preserve a future for those children that deserve safety, they deserve prosperity, they deserve the lands that we've had for 1,000 years and more. That land belongs to them. So the more we can do together, the better.
Yeah, we've got like a 1.5-year-old baby here, and we was living near London, and London was getting more and more dangerous. We saw yesterday, what happened in Paris. But before we get to all that, Ashlea, what was your life like before you got involved in politics? What led to this?
Well, where I grew up, I'm from Salford, and where I grew up, it's very white British. It always was. But the way I grew up to be strong. So my dad was a career criminal. That was his life and his choice. He didn't know any better. That's how he was taught by his parents. But I had a very, very good mum, a mum that worked hard, worked 2 jobs at a time, and went back to university despite being a single parent, 4 children, and having an ex-partner, that lived a life of crime. And she taught us from very young to be strong, always know your rights. She was always drumming it in our heads, know your rights, which often got me detention in school, actually, and often put me in isolation in school, because I'd argue with the teachers and say, I know my rights, my mum told me, and they'd make me go stand under the bell. So it didn't actually work out that well in primary school and high school, but she always instilled this sense of strength into us.
Yeah.
And she always instilled, defend the underdog, stick up for people, because she raised 4 loud-mouthed children that were strong. So she was like, you've got this strength, defend other people if they need you to. So it's quite funny what I'm doing now, when my mum taught me all of that when I was young. And I remember we used to watch like PM Question Time as a child. My mum was quite political, and we used to watch that at lunchtime from school, and that's what we was into, which is really strange for children, but we'd watch that. I remember my brother wrote to John Major at the time about trucking issue and stuff, so it was always quite political. But it was just like political in the sense we spoke to our friends and families about it. It wasn't that much. And then when I was 18, I met a Royal Marine. I had a baby very young, and I ended up moving to Peterborough because he was putting a careers office there due to injury. And when I went to Peterborough, coming from White Salford, I was shocked. I was like, what is this place? I was walking down the high street, and every accent I heard was a different accent. And the only English voice there was my own. And at the time, I worked in Asda on the checkout. And foreigners were coming in, and I'm thinking, okay, out of 100 people, I've probably seen 7 British people, and that was so, no pun intended, but so foreign to me. And I was just like, what is this place? And there was lots of like money shops, do you know, where you send money home and stuff like that. And I remember saying to my partner at the time, why so many foreign people go in those money shops? And they said, because they get the benefits and then they send them home. So that was, I think that was the moment I thought, oh, there's a problem here. There's a problem with immigration. There's a problem, you know, with diversity and stuff. That's the first time I think I noticed that. Anyway, I moved back to Manchester and everything, went about my life. I was working as a barber up here, and every day in the barber shop, I was speaking to elderly men. And you speak about politics in a barber shop. That's all you talk about is politics all day long. And I voted for Brexit in 2016, as did all of my family and everyone I know. And I was watching the news every day, getting ready for work. And I was watching politicians label us dim little Englanders, you know, saying we're xenophobic and we're too uneducated to know what we voted for. And they really made a point of drumming it home that it's the north of England that are dim. It's the north of England that have no education. It's the north of England that need us to tell them what they need. And I was so offended by that. And I was getting angrier and angrier every day, thinking, how dare you? You're meant to represent us. You're meant to represent the will of the people. You're not meant to represent your own opinions. So I was furious. And one day I didn't know there was a patriot scene or a movement at that time. And I posted on Facebook because I had seen the yellow vest in France. And I said, right, we're doing a demonstration in Manchester City Centre at St. Peter's Square for Brexit. So anyone that wants to come along. And 80 people turned up. And I was stood there like, well, what do I do now? Because I just thought like 3 people would turn up, and then I was like, crap. Like I was actually quite nervous because I had never had to speak to 80 people in my life. I'm not an overly social person to begin with, so 80 people. And then I was like, crap. So I gave my first speech there, and then like the rest is kind of history because from fighting for Brexit, do you know, I ran into Britain First in St Anne's Square when they were campaigning. I went to one of their meetings, and quite frankly, I expected to walk into their meeting, to be honest, and see like white hoods and a pitchfork or something. That was like the first thing I thought when I thought Britain First. And I walked in. And I agreed with everything. I thought there's nothing here that I don't agree with. Yes, I want, you know, a country that's preserved for our children. Yes, I want our women to have safety. Yes, I don't want our teenage lads stabbed to death. And I was thinking, all of these things they're saying are just common sense. And this is how just most people think. So when I went to that meeting, I started working for Britain First. I started writing for them and different things like that. But I was also still working at the barber shop and still raising my son. And I was trying to juggle everything. And in the end, I just couldn't juggle everything. It was just impossible. So I quit the barber shop and I said sorry to the boss because I really, really liked my boss at the time. We still speak now. He's a brilliant guy, a brilliant English barber. Do you know, there's not many of them left. And I do like that guy. So when I quit there and started working for Britain First full time, and we've taken off. Like I think of Britain First when I first joined, and you know, Paul had just been starting rebuilding that after coming out of prison. So we was only getting like 7 memberships a week, and we was only bringing in, you know, a small amount of donations. Which you know, with that you can't do much campaigning. And then think of that to now, and it's just unreal the growth, and that's because of how bad this country is. People are fed up. People want change. So they are coming to people like us because they realise we're not polished politicians. We're just like them. We're concerned parents. We're concerned citizens of Britain. Like we want to preserve what our grandparents, our ancestors, what all of those people fought and died for.
Yeah, well said. And, you know, there's always been some amount of people coming into the country, but it just looks like they've released the floodgates over the
Yeah,
years to the point where a lot of problems are manifesting.
yeah,
We can get to, you know, we can get to the causes of that later on. So we interviewed Maggie Oliver, who was one of the
yeah,
whistleblowers on the grooming gangs, and she said the police and the government always say, you know, we're sorry, we've made changes, this won't happen again, and it doesn't matter who gets in power, everything just remains the same. They're just absolute lying beep.
yeah.
So what are your thoughts on this? Because it seems to us like one of the biggest organized crime syndicates is operating to this day, assaulting primarily teenage British girls across the country, and the government's scared to do anything about it, or they're actually enabling it under race relations.
Yeah, it's absolutely outrageous that we'd sacrifice our children, British children, on the altar of multiculturalism. That is outrageous. You won't investigate a group of Pakistani men raping young English girls because you're scared of stirring up community tensions. How about, first of all, if that community is so riled up by investigations, don't have that community here in the first place, because that community, like, the difference is, but I speak to people on Twitter about this, and people always say, oh, but there's more white rapists. Okay, in a white majority country, there is going to be more white rapists. We're not saying that, white men don't do this. Of course they do. There's rapists in every society. But the difference is that in these communities, in these Pakistani communities, in these grooming gangs, you will get an uncle involved, a nephew involved, a father involved, a brother involved. It will be a community effort, and that community won't out a rapist. Whereas, say, where I live in Salford, if we found out about a paedophile or a rapist in our area, that paedophile or rapist would not survive long in our areas. We wouldn't have it. And that's the difference. We don't condone it, and we will drive it out. Whereas in those areas, why aren't there community leaders speaking up? Why aren't there community leaders doing something about this? Because if this isn't a problem with the religion, then surely the religious leaders should speak out about this, condemn it, and shut it down, because they have a lot of sway in those communities. Pakistani rape gangs amount to 84% of organised street level grooming. 84%, that's a massive overrepresentation in that kind of field of grooming. And you've got to ask yourself, are these people more sexualized? Are these people, obviously they're not going to rape or groom their own children, because then their own children are impure. So our children are the children at risk. They've said now that over 500,000 English girls have been raped. Over 500,000. So back in 2019, we started doing anti-grooming operations in all of the different towns and cities across the UK where grooming had been quite dominant. And we went around those areas. We went to social services, we went to police in the area, we went to all the kebab shops and the taxi ranks giving out leaflets. And they was very angry that we dared come to their areas, despite them being formerly white British, and say, keep a lookout for this, or we're watching this area because our girls won't be groomed under our watch. And we actually went to Rotherham, and I went in the police station after we did the other activities, and we were speaking to the superintendent, and the superintendent was giving me the usual, trying to brush me off, saying, we're dealing with this, very smug and arrogant, because obviously I'm a working class girl. Like, why would he give me the time of day? That's the kind of tone he took with me, but he didn't realise how persuasive I am and how I won't shut up when I've got a point to make. So I kept on at him, saying, you're complicit in this. You are complicit because you've not protected these girls. And I made him actually slip up and say they had 45 years worth of evidence of grooming in the town. Previously, it had only been reported in the media that there was 10 to 20 years of grooming, and that moronic superintendent that thought I was a dim little Englander from a council estate got tripped up by me. And that was brilliant. That went everywhere at the time. 45 years. You had 40. Oh, sorry. I do apologise for that. I do apologise. Oh my God. I do apologise for that. She wanted to be a part of the show. But 45 years of grooming. And that's what we know of. So that makes you think, if you think of when immigration really started, and this was before the Tony Blair, opening of the floodgates, way before that, these people that had come here to work, and there was only in small numbers then, still felt confident enough to go and rape our girls, to go and groom our girls. That is outrageous. So if they, at that time, they were a very, very small minority. So can you imagine in 10 years when white British children are the minority, or in 30 years when British people as a whole are the minority, how our children will be treated then? Because they're already being groomed and raped now. They're already being stabbed to death. So what's next? It's a scary, scary thought.
It is. It's absolutely disgusting. I just want to make it clear to the viewers, you know, wherever predators are, it doesn't matter what race they are, we will go after them. We've interviewed
100%.
Epstein survivors. You know, we've exposed stuff that's gone on with Diddy and elite deviants in Hollywood. And there's an unusual situation here in our country right now, if you're watching around the world. And Maggie Oliver also helped us understand this, whereby, and Raja Mia as well, who's a Muslim guy who's blown the whistle on these gangs, came on, whereby, like Ashlea said, if there's a predator in your community, you need to clean house. But what's happening is these predators are being protected by our government, and if they do get arrested, they get slaps on the wrist, and when they get released, they go back to their families, to their communities, as if nothing has even happened. It's like they're just viewing the young white English teenage girls as trash they can use and abuse, and it doesn't affect their status in the community. And that is